You've seen the movies. You know the threat of supervolcanic eruption is real. You also know that after such an explosion, everything would be blown to bits. But you probably don't know what really happens after a supervolcano erupts, because there are things that will survive the blast wave, including dangerous chemicals, toxic gases, falling debris, and even magma itself. So, let's talk about the top 5 most dangerous things that will happen after a supervolcano erupts. Starting off at number 5, we have, beyond the blast wave, pyroclastic flows. When you hear the term volcanic eruption, you might automatically think of lava. This is what you see in many fictionalized depictions of volcanic eruptions. Rivers of molten rock destroying everything in their path. While this is certainly a part of the danger posed by a supervolcano, it isn't exactly what you're thinking of. First, when a supervolcano erupts, the blast wave does indeed precede a torrent of lava. However, this lava doesn't come in the form of flowing rivers, but instead incandescent avalanches known as pyroclastic flows. Pyroclastic flows are hot mixtures of solid and molten rock fragments along with hot gases that travel down the side of a volcano at high speeds. The literal definition of incandescent refers to something shining with an intense red or orange light, which is exactly how these avalanches appear due to the high temperature of the materials they contain and their fast speed. These pyroclastic flows can reach speeds of up to 160 kilometers per hour and temperatures exceeding 700 degrees Celsius. And unfortunately for anyone caught in their path, they are nearly impossible to escape. To put just how deadly these flows are into perspective, during the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens in Washington state, one of these pyroclastic flows raced down its slopes and incinerated everything in its path, including a group of foresters who were monitoring the mountain's recovery from previous logging operations. Their bodies were found whole, despite being close to the top of the mountain. That's how deadly these flows can be. At number 4, we have global winter. We all know the greenhouse effect and the impact human activity has had on our planet's average temperatures. But did you know that volcanic activity plays a significant role in regulating global temperatures? In fact, some scientists believe that the end of the Ice Age was caused by a series of massive volcanic eruptions. Now, of course, you might be thinking, aren't volcanoes hot? How could they cause anything to freeze? It's a fair point, but consider this. Supervolcanic eruptions expel large amounts of water vapor into the atmosphere. If this happens suddenly and over a large enough scale, it can upset the balance of the hydrological cycle. The result can be sudden and dramatic changes in precipitation patterns and global temperatures. For example, in 1815, Mount Tambora, a volcano located in Indonesia, erupted with a force of 6 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, making it one of the most violent eruptions in recorded history. The following year, 1816, became known as the Year Without a Summer. North America and Europe experienced an unseasonably cold summer and fall with widespread crop failures. Temperatures fell as much as 2.5 degrees Celsius below normal, and snow fell in July in some areas. Of course, this pales in comparison to what would likely happen if a supervolcano erupted, because Tambora only had a blast radius of around 40 kilometers. A supervolcano would have a much larger impact on global temperatures. No. 3, we have global darkness. One of the most terrifying aspects of a supervolcano eruption is its potential to plunge the world into darkness. Now, before you say, come on, there's no way a volcano could do that, consider this. The 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora, we previously mentioned, shot 40 cubic kilometers of ash into the atmosphere. This massive amount of material blocked sunlight and caused temperatures to plummet, but that was nothing compared to what could happen from a super eruption. The 1991 eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines ejected around 5 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. This led to an average global temperature drop of 0.5 degrees Celsius and a more noticeable drop in the northern hemisphere of 1 degree Celsius. And while that might sound like a very small change, it was enough to alter weather patterns and crop yields worldwide. But it was still just a small fraction of what would be released by a supervolcano. Scientists estimate that the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora injected between 5 and 15% of the total volume of ash into the stratosphere, which is the atmospheric layer above the troposphere. By contrast, the Pinatubo eruption injected less than 1% of its total ash volume into the stratosphere. If we assume that a supervolcanic eruption ejects roughly 10 times the volume of material as Mount Pinatubo, and that 10% of that were injected into the stratosphere, we're looking at a potential injection of between 5 and 15% of total volume. The magnitude of this event dwarfs even the impact of the 1991 Mount Pinatubo eruption. And if that wasn't enough to cast the world into darkness, these particles could remain suspended in the stratosphere for years, continually blocking sunlight and causing darkness to blanket the planet. At number 2, we have the collapse of society. Okay, so we've covered the natural disasters that would occur in the immediate aftermath of a supervolcano eruption. But what happens next? Well, after the dust settles and the initial shockwave subsides, the true impact of the eruption becomes apparent. In the surrounding region, everything within the blast radius is either completely destroyed or buried under layers of ash. Cities turn into smoldering wastelands, and the countryside becomes a graveyard of broken structures. But the disaster doesn't end at the blast radius. In the weeks and months following the eruption, disruptions to the global climate cause food shortages and economic turmoil. Mass extinctions of both plants and animals occur. Water supplies become contaminated and disease spreads. People struggle to adapt to the new reality of their world. It would be utter chaos, and it wouldn't take long for society as we know it to collapse. And here's why. Take the 1816 eruption of Mount Tambora, which we keep referencing as an example. In the years following the eruption, food shortages, disease, and economic instability resulted in mass starvation. Some historians estimate that the eruption may have contributed to the downfall of Napoleon's empire, though whether this is true or not is highly debated. The point is, the eruption disrupted European agriculture so severely that it had political repercussions in other parts of the world. Now imagine the effects of a supervolcano eruption that is 10 times the size of Tambora. The blast alone would obliterate infrastructure and essential services in a huge swath of land. Hospitals would be overwhelmed, transportation networks would grind to a halt, and government services would cease to function. Economic systems would implode and global trade routes would collapse. Financial markets would tank and investors would scramble for safety. As panic spreads and resources dwindle, social unrest, conflict, and war become more likely. Governments struggle to maintain order and protect their citizens. It would truly be the end of the world as we know it. And at number 1, we have scorched earth. Imagine being trapped in a burning world where the sun is blotted out by ash and pumice, where the air is thick with toxic gases and filled with the stench of burnt flesh and rotting vegetation, where every breath you take burns your lungs and every step you make is on ground scorched by fire. In the aftermath of a supervolcanic eruption, such a nightmarish scenario becomes a reality. Entire ecosystems are incinerated in an instant, leaving behind a wasteland of ash and charred remains. In the closest real-world example we have, the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens devastated the surrounding environment. Before the eruption, the area around the volcano was a thriving ecosystem, home to lush forests, abundant wildlife, and a variety of plant species. After the eruption, however, the blast wave, pyroclastic flows, and ash devastated the landscape, killing thousands of animals and destroying entire habitats. The eruption left a gaping crater and a field of solidified lava and ash where forests once stood. The blast wave leveled trees over an area of 560 square kilometers and completely obliterated all life in its path. Even decades after the eruption, the area around Mount St. Helens is still recovering, and scientists predict it could take centuries before the ecosystem returns to its pre-eruption state. Now imagine the devastation wrought by a supervolcano that is 20 times more powerful than Mount St. Helens. The blast wave would scorch and sterilize everything within its path, killing all life forms in an instant. The heat would be so intense that it would literally burn the earth, leaving behind a scorched and barren wasteland. Secondary effects like ash, falling debris and toxic gases would continue to ravage the area long after the initial blast. Survivors, if there are any, would face a future of disease, famine, and struggle to rebuild in a world forever changed by the cataclysmic event. So what do you think? Do you think you could survive a supervolcano eruption? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my others. Thanks for watching.